Mr. and Mrs. Smith is now in the casting process for its new leads, and one major celebrity has been rumored. An adaptation of the 2005 movie of the same name, Mr. and Mrs. Smith is an Emmy-nominated 2024 series about two strangers who both find jobs within a spy agency, but are forced to assume new identities and be in an arranged marriage. The show featured a leading cast including Donald Glover, Maya Erskine, Paul Dano, Parker Posey, Beverly Glover, Wagner Moura, and Ron Perlman. Mr. and Mrs. Smith Season 2 has been confirmed to be in development. Per Deadline, Mr. and Mrs. Smith is actively looking for new leads to play John and Jane in Season 2. Amazon MGM is supposedly looking for an actor and an actress in their 20s to play John and Jane in the sophomore season of the show. Any offers made have not been official nor public, but it is rumored that Billie Eilish may be in talks for the role of Jane. It is not certain whether Erskine and Glover will be back in any capacity for Mr. and Mrs. Smith Season 2. What this casting update means for Mr. and Mrs. Smith Season 2. Mr. and Mrs. Smith Season 2 will look a lot different. Mr. and Mrs. Smith Season 1 ended on a cliffhanger, which has made the Season 2 situation uncertain. In said cliffhanger, John and Jane were left in a gunfight, and it was unclear whether they had made it out alive. Casting a new John and Jane would seem to indicate that Erskine and Glover's versions of the characters may have died. However, this is not a surefire thing, as Erskine and Glover had already been not expected to return. The update does seem to point to Mr. and Mrs. Smith being an anthology series, however. This format has been rumored for the series but has not been confirmed. Even if Glover and Erskine do return in a small capacity in order to wrap up their storylines, they are not the lead actors in Mr. and Mrs. Smith Season 2. As such, the season will either be an anthology season or one that very loosely ties into the events of the premiere season, even if it is not a direct follow-up. Our take on the Mr. and Mrs. Smith casting news. Billie Eilish would be an interesting choice. Billie Eilish as Eva in Swarm. As a fan of Erskine and Glover, both independently and in Mr. and Mrs. Smith, I would be sad to see the actors leave the show. An actor like Eilish would be an interesting addition to the series. The Oscar-winning musician made her acting debut when she appeared in Glover's series Swarm. Eilish played a supporting role in that series, so it would be interesting to see what the actor could do in a leading part in Mr. and Mrs. Smith.